The evening began the way so many carefully curated moments did along the coast, soft lights stretching across the horizon, the sea breathing in slow, patient rhythms, and the illusion of peace settling easily over everyone who had agreed to be there. Will and Electra had chosen the beach for a reason. It was neutral ground, open and honest in its beauty, a place where sharp edges were supposed to dull and difficult conversations were meant to dissolve into salt air and shared laughter. They framed it as a warm gathering, nothing formal, nothing heavy, just friends and family standing barefoot in the sand, letting the day end gently. On the surface, it worked. Candles flickered in glass holders. A fire pit crackled low. Wine glasses caught the last blush of sunset. Smiles appeared easily enough, practiced and convincing. Steffy arrived with Finn at her side, her posture relaxed in the way it only became when she was outside the walls of Forrester and away from boardrooms, deadlines, and unspoken wars. Finn's hand rested lightly at her back, a quiet reassurance rather than a claim. He smiled, greeted Will and Electra warmly, and took in the scene with the measured calm of someone who appreciated harmony, but never quite trusted it to last. He had learned, through both training and experience, that tranquil environments often hid the most revealing truths. Tonight, he told himself, was simply a gathering. Nothing more. Dylan was already there when they arrived, standing slightly apart from the main cluster, drink in hand, gaze fixed not on the ocean but on the people. He lifted his glass in greeting, his smile brief, polite, and carefully neutral. To anyone else, he looked like a friend enjoying the moment quietly. To Finn, there was something off in the way Dylan watched, as if he were cataloging expressions rather than sharing them. Dylan spoke little, offered no stories, no easy laughter. He observed, listened, nodded. The kind of presence that faded into the background while absorbing everything in reach. The group gathered closer as the light shifted, conversation flowing in gentle arcs. Will spoke about small victories, about relief at seeing everyone together without tension erupting. Electra laughed softly, her hand brushing Will's arm in an easy gesture of affection that felt sincere and unguarded. Steffi allowed herself to relax, just slightly. Moments like this were rare now, moments without confrontation or calculation. She wanted to believe in them, to let herself exist without armor. Yet beneath the warmth, there was a faint pressure, a sense that something was misaligned. It was subtle, barely perceptible at first, like a note played just off-key. Dylan's silence deepened as the night went on. He answered questions briefly, deflecting attention back to others. When laughter rippled through the group, his smile arrived a beat too late. When stories turned nostalgic, his eyes sharpened instead of softening. Finn noticed first. It was instinctive, almost unconscious. He watched the way Dylan's gaze lingered when certain names surfaced, the way his posture tightened when conversations brushed close to old territory, and then veered away. Finn's mind, trained to notice patterns and inconsistencies, began quietly assembling fragments. Dylan wasn't uncomfortable. He was restrained. There was a difference, and Finn felt it settle uneasily in his gut. The first crack came in the form of an old photograph. Will had been scrolling through his phone, sharing images from earlier trips, lighter times. He held the screen up, laughing at a candid shot from years ago, something harmless and sentimental. The image passed briefly from hand to hand before Dylan glanced at it, his reaction almost imperceptible. Almost. His fingers tightened around his glass, and his eyes flicked to Steffi for half a second too long before he looked away. It was enough. Finn felt the shift immediately. He watched Steffi's face, saw nothing but polite interest. If she noticed Dylan's reaction, she gave no sign. Finn filed the moment away, telling himself not to overinterpret. Still, the unease grew. Later, as the night deepened and conversation softened, a phone chimed. It was Dylan's. The sound cut through the ambient noise with sharp clarity. He glanced down quickly, too quickly, and for a brief, unguarded instant, something like recognition crossed his face. Not surprise. Recognition. He turned the screen away from the group, his thumb hovering as if debating whether to respond or erase whatever had appeared. Finn caught the movement, the hesitation, the tension coiled beneath it. Dylan looked up again, meeting Finn's gaze with a neutral expression that did nothing to dispel suspicion. If anything, it confirmed it. Finn smiled faintly, the practiced expression of a man accustomed to difficult patience and delicate conversations, but his thoughts had shifted fully into alertness. Dylan knew something. The question was what, and why he was choosing to bring it here, now, wrapped in the pretense of camaraderie. As wine glasses were refilled and the fire burned lower, Dylan finally spoke more than a sentence at a time. He raised his glass, offering a toast that should have sounded celebratory. His words were warm, his tone sincere, yet something about it rang hollow. He congratulated Will and Electra on finding peace, on building something stable and honest. The word honest lingered strangely in the air, emphasized just enough to feel deliberate. Finn watched Steffy closely this time. Her expression remained composed, but he felt her shift beside him, subtle and controlled. The toast ended with polite applause, but the mood did not recover its earlier ease. Silence crept in between conversations, stretching longer than comfort allowed. The ocean's steady rhythm suddenly felt louder, the fire's crackle more insistent. People began to withdraw into themselves, sensing without understanding that the night had reached a turning point. Finn replayed the evening in his mind with clinical precision. The photograph. The message. The toast. None of it proved anything on its own, but together they formed a pattern he could not ignore. Dylan was not here to reminisce. He was here to test reactions, to gauge fractures, to identify fault lines. Finn had seen that behavior before in patients hiding symptoms, in families circling a truth no one wanted to speak aloud. The realization chilled him. As the gathering wound down, goodbyes were exchanged with careful politeness. No one lingered. Will and Electra thanked everyone, their smiles tinged now with confusion. Steffy hugged Electra, murmuring something supportive, her voice steady. Finn watched Dylan from the corner of his eye, waiting for something he could not quite name. It came at the very end. As Steffy turned away, Dylan's gaze locked onto her with an intensity that stripped away every layer of pretense he had worn all evening. There was no smile this time, no polite distance. Just certainty. Recognition. A look that said more in silence than any accusation ever could. Finn saw it clearly, felt the message land with force. Dylan knew a secret Steffy had buried, one that this group had silently agreed never to exhume. Steffy met his gaze for a fraction of a second before looking away, her spine straightening, her expression tightening just enough to confirm Finn's worst suspicion. She said nothing. Dylan said nothing. But the exchange echoed louder than the storm of thoughts racing through Finn's mind. The night ended not with laughter or closure, but with an oppressive quiet that followed them back up the beach, and into their separate paths. Finn walked beside Steffy in silence, his questions pressing urgently against his restraint. He knew better than to push her here, now, while the salt air still clung to them and unseen eyes might linger. But the certainty burned in him, this was not over. Whatever Dylan knew had teeth, and he had chosen his moment carefully. Behind them, the ocean continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to human secrets. Ahead of them lay consequences none of them had yet named. And somewhere in the darkness, Dylan carried the satisfaction of a man who had confirmed his leverage, his silence now heavier and far more dangerous than any spoken threat. The warmth of the evening had evaporated completely, leaving only the chill of anticipation. Whatever had been buried in the past had shifted tonight, stirred awake by glances and half-words. And as Steffy disappeared into the shadows beside Finn, one truth lingered, sharp and unavoidable: the real storm had not yet begun. The drive home unfolded in near silence, broken only by the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers and the low hum of the engine cutting through damp coastal air. Steffy stared straight ahead, hands steady on the wheel, posture composed with the kind of discipline she had perfected over years of surviving crises that never allowed the luxury of collapse. Finn sat beside her, watching the road through the glass, but seeing something else entirely, his thoughts circling back to the look Dylan had given her, the unmistakable weight of it pressing into his chest like an unanswered diagnosis. Neither spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because whatever needed to be said felt too large, too dangerous to release into the confined space of the car, while the night was still listening. By the time they reached home, the quiet had transformed from awkward to ominous. The house greeted them with familiar stillness, lights low, walls heavy with the comfort of routine, yet even that safety felt altered now, as if something invisible had crossed the threshold ahead of them and was waiting. Steffy set her keys down with deliberate care, removed her shoes, and exhaled slowly, the first crack in her composure slipping through the controlled calm. Finn watched her closely, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened when she thought she was unobserved. He had seen her weather storms before, public scandals, corporate battles, family betrayals, but this felt different. This was not a threat from the outside. This was something buried, something personal. Finn finally spoke, his voice gentle but direct, the way he spoke to patients when truth mattered more than comfort. He did not accuse. He did not demand. He simply said Dylan's name and let it hang between them. Steffy did not respond immediately. She moved toward the window instead, gazing out at the darkened street as if searching for a version of the night that had not ended the way it did. When she turned back, the confidence she wore like armor earlier was thinner now, stretched tight over something fragile. She told Finn that some stories did not stay buried because they were harmless, they stayed buried because exposing them would destroy more than they saved. Her words were measured, careful, chosen as if each carried weight she could not afford to drop. Finn listened, resisting the urge to fill the silence, understanding instinctively that this was not a confession meant to be forced. It was something that had to surface on its own terms, if at all. Steffy admitted that Dylan's presence had not been accidental. She had known he would be there, had agreed to it under the assumption that time and distance had dulled whatever knowledge he once held. Seeing him again, watching him move through the evening with calculated restraint, had shattered that illusion. Finn felt the shift then, the confirmation that his suspicion had been right. Dylan was not circling aimlessly. He was positioning himself. As Steffy spoke, fragments of the past surfaced, not in neat chronology, but in emotional impressions. A period of chaos when decisions were made under pressure. A moment when protecting the company had meant protecting a narrative at all costs. A truth that, if spoken aloud, would have reshaped reputations, alliances, even parentage. She did not name the secret directly, not yet, but Finn felt its gravity settle heavily between them. This was not gossip or scandal. This was the kind of truth that could fracture families permanently. Finn's instinct was to shield, to solve, to remove the threat before it could do harm. But he understood that this was not something that could be fixed with confrontation or exposure. Dylan's power lay not in what he said, but in what he could say. Silence was his leverage, and tonight he had tested how sharp it still was. Finn asked the question he had been holding back since the beach, not accusing, but searching for clarity: why now? Steffy answered with a truth that unsettled them both. Because the ground was shifting. Because the Forrester empire was already unstable. Because secrets gained value when power structures weakened. Dylan had waited until the fractures were visible, until alliances were strained and trust was thin. Whatever he knew, he believed the timing was finally right to use it. The next morning brought no relief. Messages arrived early, subtle at first, Dylan asking if everyone had made it home safely, Dylan commenting on what a meaningful night it had been. Each word felt innocuous on its own, but Steffy read them with new awareness, recognizing the quiet assertion beneath the friendliness. He was reminding her that he was still there, still watching, still holding something she could not ignore. Meanwhile, Finn's unease deepened as he replayed the evening again and again. The photo Dylan reacted to, he realized, had not been random. It had been from a specific period, one layered with unresolved questions and carefully managed narratives. Finn began to connect dots he had never thought to align before, seeing how certain events, long accepted as settled, suddenly felt incomplete. As a doctor, he knew that symptoms ignored did not disappear, they simply waited. Elsewhere, Dylan moved through his own morning with a quiet sense of confirmation. The beach had given him what he needed. Not answers, he already had those, but validation. Steffy's reaction, subtle as it was, had told him everything. The secret was still alive, still capable of causing damage. He did not rush to act. That was never his style. Power, he understood, was most effective when applied slowly, when anticipation did the work before action ever arrived. He reviewed the old materials again later that day, an image, a timeline, a message chain that had never been meant to survive. Each piece alone was ambiguous. Together, they told a story that contradicted the official version everyone had agreed to live with. Dylan did not see himself as a villain. In his mind, he was a corrector of imbalance, a man holding truth in a world built on selective memory. Whether he would use it for justice or leverage remained deliberately unresolved, even to himself. Back at Forrester, Steffy moved through meetings with her usual command, but those closest to her noticed the difference. She was sharper, less tolerant of improvisation, more protective of information flow. Old instincts had reawakened. She tightened access, limited conversations, and quietly began assessing who could be trusted if things escalated. The company, already strained by ongoing conflicts, felt the tension ripple outward, an unease that could not be traced to a single cause. Finn, unable to ignore his instincts, began his own quiet investigation, not into Dylan, but into the past Steffy had alluded to. He approached it clinically, carefully, respecting boundaries while seeking context. He knew that if Dylan decided to speak, the fallout would not be contained to Steffy alone. It would touch children, legacies, identities. Finn felt the weight of that responsibility settle heavily on him, a role he had not chosen, but could not refuse. The next encounter came sooner than expected. Dylan appeared at the hospital under the pretense of visiting someone else, crossing Finn's path with casual ease. Their conversation was polite, restrained, layered with subtext neither acknowledged outright. Dylan spoke of the beach, of how revealing gatherings like that could be. Finn responded with professional courtesy, but beneath it, his mind worked rapidly, assessing, calibrating. When Dylan finally left, he did so with the faintest smile, one that suggested he had learned exactly what he wanted. That night, Steffy stood alone in her office long, after everyone else had gone home, city lights glowing beyond the glass. She replayed the exchange at the beach again, this time with brutal clarity. Dylan's silence had been intentional. He was not threatening yet. He was waiting. And waiting, she knew, was dangerous. She understood now that avoidance was no longer an option. The secret, whatever form it ultimately took, was no longer dormant. It had been seen, acknowledged, and marked for use. The question was not whether it would surface, but how, and who would control the narrative when it did. As the days unfolded, a sense of inevitability began to settle over everything. Conversations felt layered. Smiles carried double meanings. The past pressed closer to the present with each passing moment. Steffy realized that protecting what she had built would require confronting what she had buried, even if doing so meant dismantling parts of herself she had relied on for years. And somewhere in the margins of it all, Dylan waited, patient and precise, knowing that the most powerful move he had made so far was not what he revealed, but what he chose to leave unsaid.